welcome everybody. There are lots of folks here from Texas, lots of folks from the DMV area, and folks joining us from all over the country. And it looks like maybe a few from outside the country. So welcome everybody. Hope this is a convenient time for you. I could not be more excited about this topic. Just wanted to give you a few minutes worth of SAOTG and Illuminos. So I started SAOTG in 2006 in Texas with a goal of not just being another tutoring company. We wanted to focus on those foundational skills, helping kids learn how to learn. These executive function skills like organization, time management, study skills, prioritizing, self-advocating, certain aspects of social skills. And it turned out it was much needed, and it was a good idea. After growing every year for about 10 years, I co-founded Illuminos with Wendy in order to bring these critical services to other major cities around the country. So could not be more excited about that growth. And given the impact of COVID on kids' education for the past 2 years, it's been incredibly trying on kids and having to flex their executive function muscles. And we could not be more excited to be in a position to help a growing number of families around the country and even outside of the country, including Hong Kong, Mexico, Scotland. So we're very excited about that. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Jennifer Engel Fisher from Weinfeld Education Group and Stephanie Frumkin from Exceptional Educational Solutions. Between the two of them, we're talking about decades of experience in education and helping families navigate the sometimes turbulent waters of accommodations, IEP plans, 504 plans. And many of you are at different points in your process, from just receiving a diagnosis and starting the process to maybe having some struggles with your school system, school district, in order to get the accommodations that your children absolutely deserve. So this topic could not be more timely, and certainly there's not a more important topic than this to discuss right now. So thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Jennifer, for joining us. We look forward to you sharing your expertise. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over, I believe, here to Wendy to share how to get in touch with us, and then hand it over to Jennifer and Stephanie to get going and share their wealth of knowledge with us.
So good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. So I sit in the DC metro area where we serve our local folks here. We do serve all over, but we reside here, and we help kids with executive functioning skills, organization, time management, calendaring and planning, study skills, note-taking skills, test-taking skills, and something that Evan coined a term for called impression management. And that is, how do you show up to other people? What are you doing? What kind of impressions are you leaving on people? And do you realize what you're doing is actually leaving an impression, and is it what you want to leave? We do have a curriculum that we run we put our kids through. We integrate it into their everyday world. It is not done in the abstract. We work with their real work and what's going on in their lives. So you can reach us on the web at illuminos.co. We'll get some information at the end, but we're really here to highlight Jennifer and Stephanie. So this is a really exciting topic. It's something that we've had a lot of interest in, and a lot of parents call us right after a diagnosis needing help and saying, I don't know what I need. So we've decided to bring the experts and folks that we really like to come and talk to you. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. I will hold them and read them out to be answered at the end. And yes, this will be recorded and replay. It will be available probably Friday on our website, and that is under illuminos.co. And then you can go to parent resources, and it's right there along with all of our other less stressed parenting. So with that, Evan, do you want to do, is there any more introduction that you have to do of the women that are hosting?
No, nobody knows them better than Stephanie and Jennifer know themselves. So I will let them, we'd be here all day with their wealth of experience. So without further ado, Jennifer and Stephanie, please help us with this wonderful topic about IEPs and 504s and helping families navigate these sometimes unnecessarily turbulent waters, it feels like. And I know that these things look different in different places. And so we look forward to learning from you today. And thank you very much.
Thank you for that nice introduction. And I love learning more. I learn something new about your company every time I come to one of these webinars. So I'm just going to go over I'm Jennifer Engel Fisher. I'm the Associate Director and Director of Advocacy of Weinfeld Education Group. I'm just going to go over an overview of the presentation for today. We are going to be first talking about individualized education plans, or IEPs, and then Stephanie is going to take over and she's going to talk about Section 504 plans. And we're going to do a side-by-side comparison, talk about the benefits of each one and the limitations of each one. And then we're going to open the floor for Q&A. And we want to make sure we have a lot of time for Q&A because I'm sure there's a lot of questions that you all have about this process. So there is a chat box. Before we begin, if you want to put in the chat box, are you a parent of a child with special needs? Are you in the process right now? It gives us an idea of the audience who we're speaking to. So that will pop up in the chat box for everybody to see.
Yeah, we love to know who's out there. Bunch of, got a blank screen here. I love to know who's there. If you have children with IEPs or 504s, you want one, you feel like your child needs one, we'd love to hear from you. And yeah, thank you so much for putting some things in the chat. People are deciding, someone has a child with an IEP, looking for an advocate, perhaps. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So I'm going to get started.
Okay, great. And I'll turn my camera off and I will come back on when I talk about 504 plans. Thanks so much, Wendy and Evan. I love what you do. Thanks for inviting us.
So I put up a slide for the very beginning. It says, I'm not sure why Mr. Barth always feels compelled to bring an advocate to the IEP meeting, outnumbered. The IEP meetings and IEP meetings can be extremely stressful and frustrating for families, and we understand that. And that's why we're here to help navigate through this process with you and to provide you with all of this information today. Sometimes you walk into a meeting and there could be 13, 14 people from the school there and you have no idea who's sitting around the table. So IEP meetings, by the nature of their makeup, can create an uncomfortable, unpleasant, or adversarial relationship. We don't want that to happen, and they don't have to be that way. So walking into a situation with the mindset of being collaborative and knowing as much as you can is really the first step for a productive and successful meeting. And I'm going to go into more detail later, but I'm going to show you what to do before a meeting, during the meeting, and after the meeting to make you feel more comfortable, to make you feel more prepared. So you're going in there with a bank of knowledge and not feeling like you're not understanding the lingo or the jargon. So what is an IEP? An IEP is a legally binding document, and it falls under the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that began as Public Law 95-142, excuse me, I just fumbled, in 1975. And then it was changed to IDEA, and then it was reauthorized in the 2000s. And it is legally binding, and it ensures all children with disabilities have available FAPE, which is a free, appropriate public education, which, just as a commonality, is also binding for a Section 504 plan that emphasizes special ed and related services such as occupational therapy, speech language, physical therapy, social skills, etc., counseling, designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. So what is special education? Special education is for students to be prepared to lead productive and independent lives to the maximum extent possible. It is free, like the F in FAPE. It is individually designed, and that's what the I in IEP stands for. It's individualized instruction to meet their unique needs. Special education is delivered in the classroom, or how we refer to it on an IEP is inside general education. Outside of general education, meaning a self-contained classroom. It's also provided at home, if needed, and other settings in the school building. Special education is provided in general education schools, comprehensive schools, as well as there are special education certified private schools. And we are fortunate enough in our area, in the metropolitan DC area, to have many, many special education resources here. And the goal of IDEA and special education is, and I'm sure you've all heard this word of inclusion, is the student with the disability, the identified educational disability, remaining in the general education classroom to the maximum extent possible. And that is called their least restrictive environment, or LRE. And there we go with the acronyms, because they're going to start popping up, and I want to make sure we all have a clear understanding of those. So there is a confusion, and it's an understandable one, between a child that has a medical disability and then the educational disability. So for example, if your child has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, that does not 100% mean your child would be found eligible for special education services. I know it sounds crazy, and I completely get it. We've had this round and round discussion at IEP meetings before, but that's what IDA calls for. There are actually 13 educational disability categories, which I'm not going to read to you because they're listed here. The ones that ADHD, if your child has ADHD and they require specialized instruction, that would fall under the other health impairment, the OHI disability category. Oh, I went too fast. Students that are learning disabled, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia would fall under specific learning disability. And as of a couple of years ago, you can actually state the disability names of dyslexia, dysgraphia, and dyscalculia on the IEP, where in the past schools did not do that. So if you do have a child with one of those 3 learning disabilities, you need to make sure that the names of the disabilities are in the IEP. So this is also information that's very important. An IEP meeting, unlike a Section 504 meeting, there are required participants. The parents are members of the IEP team. Legally, there are statutes, they are meaningful participants. So schools cannot hold that meeting if you are not there. The student, as appropriate, others at the table with special knowledge or expertise. So the speech language pathologist, the school counselor. There must be a special education member in your meeting, and someone who interprets evaluations. One of the things that we're finding, again, going off the slides a little bit, is that the parents are getting phone calls from schools saying, well, let's go over the evaluation over the phone, and that way we'll have more time at the meeting. You can ask questions. I always tell parents that's not a good idea, because any questions you may have are not going to be documented in the record or the notes of the meeting, and therefore there's no paper trail. Also, it puts the parent in a position of not having other supports at that team, such as a consultant or even the classroom teacher, to ask questions. So we really, really tell parents that's not a good idea. It's better to actually have 2 IEP meetings than it would be to have a phone call beforehand to discuss an evaluation. It's also important to note that the person who conducted the evaluation, if they're not there to present, another assessor with the same credentials must present it. So we've gone to a lot of meetings, and the child had a speech language evaluation, and we get to the IEP table and there's no speech language pathologist at the table to review that assessment. The occupational therapist and the special educator cannot review a speech language assessment. So you need to make sure that when you are confirming who's attending the meeting, all those necessary parties are there. You also need authority to allocate resources. So typically the principal or the assistant principal will attend the meeting. There are some schools that have special education chairs attend, but technically it's somebody from the county or district to allocate resources, not necessarily the school. And most importantly, and I truly believe this in my heart, the general education teacher. So not any member of the team is allowed to leave the meeting unless excused in writing by the parent. That is part of the law. So when you're at an IEP meeting and you hear somebody say, the principal or whoever's running the meeting, well, Mrs. Smith has to go back to her classroom, and Mrs. Smith gets up to leave. They're not allowed to. They actually have to ask your permission, to the parent. Are you okay with this teacher leaving the meeting? I will tell you that 99% of the time, I am not okay with the general education teacher leaving, because they offer such valuable information. You're able to then connect what the speech language pathologist is saying, the school psychologist is saying, what you're seeing at home to what this teacher is seeing in the classroom. So yes, you have to actually grant written authority for any one of these members to leave the meeting. We have an IEP process. There are typically 3 meetings for the IEP process. You're going to hear me talk about a 4th, and that's because some counties, some states, counties, districts have one before you get to the first one, which is the child's find meeting. And they might call it an EMT meeting, an SST meeting, an MDT meeting, all these, fun acronyms. But what that really is not an IEP meeting. And as parents, you have the right to request to go directly to an IEP meeting to start the legal 90-day timeline of this process. So at the child's find meeting, they review any existing information to determine if they suspect an educational disability. And remember, just because your child has a diagnosis of dyslexia, which is, from a medical disability, that does not mean that they would automatically be found eligible for special education. My recommendation is, if your child does have any of those diagnoses, to automatically request an IEP meeting and bypass that first EMT meeting. Because if the report recommends direct specialized instruction, you want to start that IEP process timeline. You don't want to waste 1 minute when it comes to your child. At that first meeting, they determine if they suspect an educational disability, and then they ask the question, if they do suspect a disability, do we need to collect additional data? And if their answer is yes, parents would sign consent to conduct assessments. School is not allowed to conduct assessments without permission. Then you have your second meeting, which is eligibility, where you all come together to discuss the results. And then there are 3 questions, which I'm going to present, to go over the results, answer these questions, and determine if your child is identified as a student with an educational disability and requires specialized instruction. And that's really, those are the buzzwords: specialized instruction, in order to access the curriculum. So if you're going to write anything down during this webinar, those buzzwords are really important. Is my child accessing the general education curriculum? Yes or no? And does my child require specialized instruction to access the general education curriculum? Then if yes, you would come back for the third meeting and you would develop the IEP. In the state of Maryland, the school is legally responsible to send you any documents you are going to be presented at that IEP meeting at least 5 business days before. It's not calendar days, it's business days. So therefore, you should have all of that information before walking into all 3 of these IEP meetings. The IEP is, they're legally mandated to review every year. I get a lot of parents who call and I say, well, let's hold an IEP meeting. And they say, well, their IEP annual review is not for another 3 months. And I'll say, but you can request one now. You can have one anytime. And parents didn't know, because when you're starting this process, and by no fault of the schools, I do want to say that you're getting this big procedural safeguards booklet, and it's like torture to read. And it's not in very user-friendly language. So you can request IEP meetings as often as you like. I mean, I'm not recommending every day, but if you want it quarterly after their progress notes come out, and then every 3 years, you have something called reevaluation. In the past, schools were required to test your child both cognitively and academic or achievement testing every 3 years. Now, the requirement is you come every 3 years to discuss if new data is needed in order to either develop the IEP or you're thinking that there's another disability present. I recommend to families that before you, that if your child's in that age of like 14 or 15, you may want to wait till they're 16 to have assessments, because you're going to need a report after the age of 16 if you're going to be trying to get accommodations for your child if they go to college or even in the workforce under a Section 504. So that's just a little information about the age of 16. These are the 3 gold questions that determine if your child will be eligible for special education. Does this student meet the criteria for one or more of the disability definitions? And when you see this, when you get the presentation, you'll see the 13 disability categories. Every one of those has a specific definition. Then if it's yes, does the student's disability adversely affect his educational performance? If that is yes, does the student require special education and related services to address his educational needs, meaning accessing the curriculum? I do want to say this, and I'm going to say it on this slide. Even if your child is on grade level and you go to an IEP meeting and they say, well, we don't see any adverse impact or educational impact, your child's reading on grade level. We don't know what your child's cognitive potential is. And that comes from the Engel Supreme Court decision a few years ago. Your child could be reading on grade level, but what is their potential? Should their potential be putting them 2 years above grade level? So it's really important that when you're at these meetings to almost get the focus off their grades on their report card, because that's not the only determining factor. You want to look at the multiple sources of data. And that's where your classroom teacher is really going to come into play for that. The IEP has required components under IDEA. You'll need a statement of the present levels, and they'll refer to at meetings as PLPs, present levels. And what you want to do is create what I call an aligned IEP. And an aligned IEP is where the present levels, every need or deficit in the present levels must be addressed somewhere else in the IEP, either a goal for that area or an accommodation. So for example, if your child's in elementary school and they are reading below grade level, and in the present levels, it says they have weak phonemic awareness skills or weak decoding skills, there has to be either a decoding goal or something to address that in the accommodations. And that's where you get the term aligned IEP. The IEP also talks about special factors. Are there interfering behaviors? Does your child need, assistive technology? There's also something that we call the impact statement. And the impact statement literally lists what areas are impacted by your child's disability. So for example, if you have a child on the spectrum, their areas of impact, could be written language, but you also have the social emotional piece. There could be executive functioning areas of impact, which is when you would call Wendy in heaven. There could be attention issues, work completion, social skills. Can my child begin, maintain, or complete a task? How are they during unstructured versus structured time? Those are all areas of impact, not just reading, writing, and math. So we want to look at the whole child. You're looking holistically. So that's another, piece of information for you to have going into the meeting is saying, you know what, I know my child is on grade level, but they have no friends. They're not getting invited to birthday parties. They don't know how to interpret a nonverbal cue. Those are areas impacted by the child's autism. And therefore, the push for finding them eligible for special education is very important. Then we would go over the accommodations, and I'm going to actually let Stephanie talk about the accommodations, because the accommodations that you would see in a Section 504 plan would be the same accommodations that you can see in an IEP. That's where the overlap is. And those are like extended time, preferential seating. The dates of service, an IEP is 1 year. The IEP process is 1 year. And what makes me so sad is that if a parent requests an IEP meeting in May or June and the school says, well, let's wait till September to come back. Once you request an IEP meeting, and please request it in writing, that timeline starts that day, that 90-day timeline. So summers don't matter. They can convene in the summers as well. And it also talks about the number of hours of services, and that you have to grant parental, in Maryland, you have to grant parental consent only on the initial IEP. So that's also an important piece to know. I'm gonna pass it over to Stephanie to go over a Section 504 plan. And in the interim, if you have any questions about the IEPs or anything that I just said, please put them in the chat and we'll go through them at the end.
Thank you so much. Before Stephanie gets started, I just wanted to let everybody know that there are a ton of questions that everybody can probably see. And so while Stephanie's talking, if you want to start to answer them, Jen, you can go ahead and do that in the chat. And otherwise, whatever we don't get to, we'll definitely, I'm taking recording of all of them. And so we will get to them at the end. So thank you so much, Jen. On to you, Stephanie.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. That was really, really informative. And I'm just going to share my screen now. up here. Alrighty. So anyway, it's so nice to see so many people here. And again, Jen did a fantastic job. I'm impressed with everything she said, and I agree with everything she said. A lot of really, really important information. We're going to change gears a little bit because actually 504 plans, while there's some overlap, they're actually quite different from IEPs in a lot of ways. Again, I'm Stephanie Frumkin. I'm an educational consultant, and I'm the founder and CEO of Exceptional Educational Solutions. I primarily work with bright and gifted students who have learning differences, and I help students with public school advocacy, private school placements, and homeschooling setup. So I do a bunch of different things, but I'm really excited to be here today, and Wendy and Evan are amazing, and what they do is so important in terms of executive functioning skills and all that other support they provide families. So I just want to start off by saying that this information provided is not intended to constitute legal advice. I'm not a lawyer, and it's just for general information purposes only. So I'm going to go over exactly what we're going to talk about today, and then I'm happy to answer questions at the end. So we're going to talk about what is a Section 504 plan. How can my child qualify for a 504 plan? What is in a Section 504 plan? 504 considerations. Does my child need a plan? We're going to talk about disagreement and resolution options. And I'm going to provide some tips and tricks that I've developed in working with families that do have 504 plans. Okay, so let's start with the basics. I will say that this is not the most, I've done a lot of presentations, and this is a little bit dry in terms of but I feel like it's really important that you get a really solid background in terms of what goes into a 504 plan and the background, and some kind of a little more dry details. But as I said, I'm going to kind of get a little more into some more interesting tips and tricks at the end. So bear with me, and I hope it's useful that you get a really solid background going forward to understand exactly about 504 plans. I know Section 504 plan is a legal term. I will sometimes might say a 504 plan or 504 informally. So Section 504 plans, they prohibit discrimination against people with disabilities from the Section 504 of the 1973 Rehabilitation Act, which is a US civil rights law. So we're really focusing on the discrimination piece. There's a lot of forms of discrimination, as we know, but education for students with people with disabilities and other discrimination against people with disabilities is a key point of this act. So a 504 plan is a written formal plan that details how the school is going to prevent discrimination against your child with disabilities by providing needed support. Again, focusing on that discrimination piece and the disabilities. A list of 504 plan is a list of accommodations the school provides to, quote, level the education playing field between your child and non-disabled peers. So it's a focus on accommodations, very different from an IEP, which is focused on that specially designed instruction. IEPs do have contain accommodations frequently, but the 504 is really focused on just those accommodations to level the playing field in education. 504s remove barriers to learning by providing equal access at school. Section 504 plans cover any disability that limits significant daily activities, including walking, self-care, seeing, hearing, speaking, reading, learning, concentrating, thinking, and communication, among other things. So as you can see, like some of those the latter things in that list, like reading, learning, concentrating, thinking, communicating, those are all really school-based items that those are, if it impacts those in those areas, your child may qualify for a 504 plan. The 504 plan provides services and supports in the general education classroom, and that is key. You're not getting special education if you have a Section 504 plan. It will be in the general education classroom with accommodations. You might be wondering, how can my child qualify? Students may be eligible if they have a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. And that we talked about that earlier about, I went through that list of all those different thinking, concentrating, reading. Those are the major life activities that would be, that might find them eligible. They have difficulty with that. A diagnosis of a disability does not automatically qualify a student for eligibility under Section 504. So the student actually must need accommodations at school. It must impact their education. And so just a diagnosis is not going to cut it in terms of your child actually getting a 504 plan. If you think your child has a disability that qualifies under Section 504, you can request a team meeting to review various sources of information. For example, report cards, medical diagnoses, psychological reports, school data, anything that would help inform the school staff about your child and how the disability is impacting them at school. So that evidence is actually important to provide. If you have documentation that supports your idea that your child does have a disability that impacts them in school, you can provide that. I would recommend actually providing that as much data as you can at any school meeting, IEP meetings too. That evidence is important. If you do think that your child might qualify, what you would do is send a letter to the staff member in charge of Section 504 plans in your school. And you ask them for a Section 504 eligibility meeting. This could vary from school to school. It could be the school counselor. It could be a 504 coordinator. It could be the assistant principal. It will vary school to school, district to district, who is actually in charge of Section 504 eligibility and plans. So find out who that is in your child's school. And I would definitely recommend including the principal on that letter. They are in charge of the whole school. They should be kept in the loop. So to make sure that you're getting what you need and the procedures are being followed. So the team that meets will compare student performance with their non-disabled peers to determine if the student needs accommodations to be afforded an equal opportunity to access educational programs and activities. Again, we're going back to the law that it's a discrimination law. It's anti-discrimination. They need it to be, that equal opportunity and level that playing field. So that's the key there. And students may receive an evaluation to determine if they have a disability that impacts their education, similar to an IEP. That evaluation piece can be really critical in determining if they do have a disability that impacts their education. You might be wondering, what's in there? What's in the 504 plan? These things are confusing, and you might not totally know what you might find in there. So I'll go through it with you. So what you might be very surprised to learn is that no written plan is actually required. I know it sounds crazy, but luckily most school districts actually do develop a plan. Phew. We do want to have a written plan if possible. So to develop a plan, a team of people knowledgeable about the student, knowledgeable about evaluation data, and knowledgeable about special service options, they all meet to determine what accommodations this particular student needs, and if they are found eligible. And that would all go on the plan. Another surprising thing you will find is that actually parents are not required members of the team. I know, shocking, right? They can do this all without you, but luckily most teams do include the parents. Shoot, again. I think we want to make sure we are included in what happens in our child's education, but be aware, you're not required. So a Section 504 plan generally includes specific accommodations, supports, services, names of people who will provide these supports, such as teachers or counselors or whoever is going to be implementing these supports. And it's important that you have the name of the person responsible for ensuring the plan is being implemented. So generally one key person who's responsible. So make sure you know who that is, and that's written in your plan. And being that it's actually not required, you can, as you can imagine, this will vary from school district to school district, and maybe even school to school. It's possible that the Section 504 plan may look very different, much more different than an IEP, even though IEPs, they will vary from state to state, but it could be very, very different even from school to school. It's possible since it's not even a requirement to have a plan. So here are some considerations related to 504s. When determining if a student has a physical or mental impairment, the school district must not consider the improvement of a disability caused by a mitigating measure, such as medication or hearing aids. This makes me think immediately of ADHD students with ADHD. If they take, say, for example, a stimulant medication and it helps them really focus, well, that would not be considered in determining if the student does have a physical or mental impairment when determining if they qualify for a 504 plan. That medication would be not taken into consideration if it does help them a lot. So one thing you might want to consider when determining eligibility is going through the actual IEP process under IDEA. And Jennifer talked about that, those laws under child find in terms of determining eligibility. There are two different tracks for eligibility for 504s. You could go through the IEP eligibility, I guess, under the child find laws, or you could go through a separate procedure through the 504 process. I usually would recommend that parents go through the IEP process because it's just more thorough and there's many more protections afforded. The 504 plan is a little less formal, fewer protections. And if given the choice, majority of time, I'd recommend going through the process under IDEA, go through the IEP process. Again, there is a separate 504 process, but if possible, in a lot of cases, it'd be good to go through the IEP process as well. If your child may need specially designed instruction to learn skills, I would recommend going the IEP eligibility route, not the 504 eligibility route. If they really need that specially designed instruction that Jennifer discussed for an IEP, if they need goals to help them achieve different skills that you need, if you want to determine that, I would recommend going through the IEP eligibility route because those kind of things are going to be in an IEP and not a 504. So yeah, an IEP may be more appropriate in certain cases. Frequently, if a student has been denied eligibility for an IEP, a Section 504 plan will be considered. And we don't want the 504 plan to be considered a consolation prize. We really want it to be something that the student actually needs, what will best serve them in school. If you really do think it's a consolation prize, like my child actually does need to develop skills, like I go back to ADHD again. If your child has organizational challenges, if they can't manage their assignments, don't know what assignments they have to do this week, or they don't know that there's a test coming up. A lot of times schools will put ADHD in that 504 category, when a lot of times I actually think that those students actually need the skills to develop. They need special designed instruction to learn those executive functioning skills. Some of what Wendy and Evan do, if your school will not provide that for whatever reason. And they might need extra help from Wendy and Evan's groups, but in school, that they should be able to teach them those skills so they can be better, so they can improve and get that instruction that they need to move forward, rather than just an accommodation that will let them, like maybe they'll check on them or check to make sure their assignments are in line, but they're not going to teach them those skills. So that's sort of the difference between the IEP and 504 in that case. A Section 504 plan may or may not be what your child needs to succeed. And if not, you can follow the dispute resolution procedures under IDEA. So again, if your child really does need the IEP, then you can go that route and dispute it. If your child some students just need accommodations and that's all well and good, then they should go that route. But I just don't want it to be a consolation prize if that's not really what they need. Okay, so how do I know if my child needs a Section 504 plan? So you can ask yourself, does my child struggle in school? I'm assuming if you are here, your child probably does struggle in school somewhat, to different degrees. Ask yourself, would accommodations help my child in the general education classroom? Again, key general ed classroom. We're not going to be in special ed here in a 504. So would accommodations help? One thing to note is accommodations don't change what students learn, but how they learn it. And here's a few sample accommodations. There's tons and tons of them, but I just put a few here just to jog your mind to think about some things that could be included on as an accommodation in a 504 plan, or actually also in an IEP. So extended time on tests with assignments, being seated near the source of instruction. So if they might do better being right near the teacher when they're talking, or some students do better if they're away from distracting environments or maybe other kids. That might be a better place for them to be seated. So behavioral management, having them be in a less distracting environment to take tests, that can be really helpful. Assistive technology, which could be something like speech to text technology, or some kind of communication device that could help them. A modified schedule that might meet their needs better than the typical schedule, and a verbal testing. So if they have trouble maybe with fine motor skills, instead of having to write everything, they could have the testing being done orally. A homeschool communication system could be helpful. For example, weekly reports to the parents, that could be really, really informative. So again, we're going to note that Section 50 plans do not provide special education. And while both IEPs and 504s help students with disabilities in school, in fact, they are actually quite different, which I think is a little surprising to a lot of people. I think, oh, they're sort of the same thing. They're actually based on different laws, based on different ideas, and they actually do have quite a few differences related to them. Okay, so I'm not a lawyer, but I'm gonna go through some of these options for resolving disagreements. If you disagree with the school team and you feel like you want to pursue some options for sort of fighting back or getting what you feel like your child really needs to be successful. So one, very low level, is negotiating with the school team and trying to bring some evidence, let them know what you feel like your child really needs to be successful within the school team. The next level would be bringing your disagreement to the school district section 504 coordinator, or there might be most schools have some kind of resolution and compliance office, although it depends on the school district, depending what they actually call that office. But there's some office in the central office that we could escalate it to within the school system. There are alternative dispute resolutions, including mediation. There's impartial hearings. You could file a complaint to the Office of Civil Rights, and you would describe how the school has failed to comply with Section 504, and you would need to do that within 180 days of the incident occurring. And again, comply, I underline that because that is the key when you're filing a complaint. It's compliance with the law or compliance with the actual Section 504 plan. So compliance. You could file for due process, which is a hearing, or you could take it to a level and pursue a lawsuit. Okay, so I'm going to get into the part where this is really my personal experiences working with families who their children do have a Section 504 plan, and just give you some tips and tricks on working to make things more successful. So I know this is going to sound, I hope this doesn't sound demeaning, but I will just tell you, if your child has a Section 504 plan, I'd recommend that you actually read it really carefully. I have a lot of families that come to me and say, oh, my child's struggling in school. They're doing horribly. Their grades are tanking. Do they have a 504 IEP? Yeah, they have a 504. Well, what's in there? What's in your 504? And they're like, I'm not really sure. I'm like, okay, let's read it. So I know it's really simple, but it is important that you actually read what's in the Section 504 plan. So read it really carefully and see, does this actually meet my child's needs? Does this really address what their individual needs are? Every child is unique. You don't want to have some kind of boilerplate Section 504 plan. You want to really meet the true needs of your child. So really consider what would help your child at school, not somebody else's child, but exactly what it is that your child needs. Don't think so much about, oh, well, what am I allowed to have? Okay, just try to put that out of your mind and just think about, what does my child need? And then go through the process of meeting, and you can always discuss and have for additions or modifications to the plan. If you do, you can call a Section 504 plan meeting, and you can add and modify the plan as needed. I think it's really important that you bring data to support your request. If you could get new testing, or could ask for a new assessment, or you might show that your child's grades are decreasing, or if there's anything else that any kind of evidence that you can support and back up your request for a change in the plan. One other helpful tip would be to have your child state the problem in the meeting, or if they're not comfortable, maybe they could write a letter, or both. I mean, both are really helpful, but that student voice is really important, and they can really describe like how they're struggling and what would help them. I think school teams might be very receptive to hearing from the actual student themselves. And no matter what the age or ability level, it's if there's a way to present it from the student voice, I think that's important.
Stephanie, I'm just going to jump in for 1 second here, because we're running really short on time.
Okay, sure.
And I wanted to make sure we get some of these questions answered. So I'm hoping that if you can just wrap this up, and then we'll go over to questions, that would be fantastic.
Sure, no problem. I'm sure I get everything. I mean, you can kind of take a look. Anything else? Just, I guess the two last things I will just say that's important is to be an advocate for your child. Don't be afraid. You are your child's best advocate. So make sure you take advantage of that, and encourage your child to be their own self-advocate. Once they get out of school and college, there's no one going to be advocating for them. So it's important that they know what their 504 plan says, go over it with them, and help them know how to advocate for their own child. Parent-teacher conferences can be helpful too, but I will wrap up there. So thanks for queuing me on time, Wendy. I know we have a lot of questions to get to. So thanks for listening, and I'm happy to answer some questions.
So
Sure.
you can start my video, Wendy. I think it won't let me start it. Okay. So
before we start, look, can I just give one thing? Sorry. So everyone who needs to hop off at 1 o'clock, we will go ahead and try to answer some of these questions, and it will be on the recording, so you can come back and watch it later. That way you can get everything that you need and just sort of fast forward to your answers. If you can stay on, that would be great. And we would love you to stay on, but I also know that everybody has their own time restrictions. So I just wanted to let you know we will get to the questions. It just may take us a little bit while after you hop off. So with that,
and you can also
Stephanie, I'm just going to go through this really quickly, and then I answered most of the questions in the chat, and mistakenly, I did that already, but mistakenly I wrote it to host and panelists and not everybody. So and it won't let me copy and paste. So I'm just going to run through what I wrote already, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I just want to go over the comparison between the two, and you could just see this is just a nice summary of the differences between what one provides and what the other one provides. And because we want to get to questions, like Wendy was saying, this will be available for you to see once the recording is done. The questions are the best part. Everybody loves the questions the most, so I do want to get to that. And while we're doing the questions, I'm just going to put up our contact information and go over some of I'm just going to read them out loud, if that's Wendy, or do you want to read them and I'll answer them because you saw what I put in the chat?
No, just go ahead and read them and answer them. That's fine.
That'd be great. Okay, thanks. So the first question I got was, here we go. Okay. My child has an IEP. Will he need a Section 504 for college? Most colleges require the assessment, which is what we said, after the age of 16. And then the college will approve accommodations based on what that college will offer. But a Section 504 plan, you can ask your high school to create one for you. And if your child is going into the workforce, that would be appropriate. A question about immersion setting, the immersion setting. Unfortunately, and I don't really agree with this, but putting your child in an immersion classroom is considered a parent's choice. And in order to receive IEP services or specialized instruction hours, they typically pull the child out of the classroom, which kind of defeats the purpose of being in the immersion program. So the other recommendation and piece I want to share is that if it's during the the foundational years elementary school, if your child has a disability, like a language-based learning disability, such as dyslexia, immersion programs are typically not recommended because they need to learn the English code before any other languages. The next question, we were asked if you should go to a meeting by yourself. And I want to say, and it's really about your level of comfort, right? Do you feel like you're going to want not only just the support about the knowledge, but somebody there who's kind of on your side and can mediate between you and the school? So I do want to say it's about a level of comfort. I mean, I know our group, we do offer 1 and 2 hour consults. And so if you wanted to do that to kind of prepare you for the meeting, you can go in on your own. You also have the right to stop a meeting at any time if you're uncomfortable. You can take a break during an IEP meeting. So don't feel obligated to sit there for the hour if you're feeling uncomfortable. You can say, I want to table this meeting, and that's okay, because you do want to come to the meeting prepared.
I just like to piggyback on that. I agree with everything you said, but whether or not you have an advocate or attorney, I think I would recommend having a support person there. Like could be a friend, a family member, your spouse, your partner, somebody there. I think is really important. So because IEP meetings can feel very, or 504 meetings can feel very overwhelming with so many professionals in the room. You're at a disadvantage, so I'd recommend a support person.
And there you go. Thank you. So another question I have is about parents who are still waiting for testing. That seems to be a common theme pretty much across the country. It's important to know that legally mandated timelines for the IEP, including assessments, were not waived during COVID. So those of you who children were in the middle of getting evaluated during when COVID hit, they are legally mandated to finish the IEP process from beginning to end of 90 days within that timeline. So we've recommended a lot of parents, and we've had a lot of parents request what's called an IEE, an independent educational evaluation, where you tell the school, you're out of compliance. You make sure you documented that in writing. Now we want you to pay for us to get our own assessment because we can get in with an evaluator quicker. Make sure you get the written consent before you shell out all your money, to get that. And the amount of money that you'll get from the counties is going to be less than what a private one will pay. We have relationships with other psychologists and speech language pathologists, that will accept a lesser rate, but waiting lists now, I'm just going to be truthfully honest, are long everywhere.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's a compliance issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also say one thing I've noticed recently is that a lot of school districts are starting to actually contract out with private assessors. I noticed a trend with that. So definitely agree with you, Jen.
It's an excellent point, Stephanie. And somebody, Anna, you asked a question about a private school and about private schools, and any private school that does not accept federal funding is not legally required to implement an IEP or a Section 5 plan. If they accept federal funding, that the answer would be very different. So for example, the private schools around here that secular and non-secular, if they don't accept money from the government, then they do not have to implement that. And the archdiocese comes into play here because that's not federal funding. So that's like a workaround that they have. But most private schools, you can ask for plans for accommodations. And it's really important before you send your child to a private school, making sure it's the right fit, making sure that they can meet your child's needs.
I don't mind if I just jump in. That actually, it's be surprised actually that a lot of private schools actually do have some federal funding like hidden. So you might want to do some digging. Like some schools actually have funding for buses or for security purposes. So I would say do a little digging to see if your school actually does accept federal funding in any way.
Yes, and that was an excellent point. Lisa, you had asked if the school how to get, how do you give permission for a teacher to leave? So I was at an IEP meeting yesterday, and the principal said to the classroom teacher, well, she needs to go back to cover her for dismissal. She needs to go back for dismissal. And I said, wait. And another supervisor from the Office of Special Ed was there, and she and I have known each other a long time, and she knew exactly what I was going to say. And she said, wait, looked at the parent and said, do you grant permission for the teacher to leave? And at this point, I knew that we didn't need the teacher anymore. And also because this child was in private school and this classroom teacher didn't even know the student we were talking about. So we documented in what's called prior written notice. And I could do, like, I wish I had an hour to talk about prior written notice and how to create a paper trail. But after an IEP meeting, you should get within 5 days all of the documents that you discussed at the meeting, any assessment reports, a draft IEP, a final IEP, and a document called prior written notice. Please pay the most attention to that document, because that captures any requests you made to this of the school, and if they agreed to it, and if they didn't agree to that request, like you requested 5 hours of reading instruction and they said, no, we're only giving your child 3, that discussion and why they disagreed should be included in the prior written notice. And if it's not, you need to what's called correct the record and respond to the school, always in writing, about what really did happen at that meeting.
Yeah, agreed. Prior written notice, very important. Make sure actually you read it really carefully. It's one of those documents, including like the invitation letter, that parents might like, oh yeah, like they don't really realize how important they are, but make sure you actually read it, and make sure you agree with everything that went on in the meeting and how things were decided. So yeah.
Stephanie, you had a great question. It said asked about informal observations. And these all are just amazing questions. You all sound so knowledgeable. So an informal observation does not require parental consent. If, like, you're just saying the occupational therapist will go observe to see your child's in the classroom. However, that conversation typically happens at an IEP meeting. So make sure that's documented in prior written notice. And I would also make sure you stay on top of it and follow up to see if it did occur. JS asked, should a student be eligible for an IEP solely based on behavior? And my response, and I'm so sorry I wrote all of these to the wrong category. If your child's behavior is, and I'm going to use these words, and these are really important words, preventing them from accessing the general education curriculum, and if I could put quotes around there, I would, then yes, you should begin the IEP process to determine if you could be found eligible under an educational disability. And I'm going to repeat those words again. I believe my child has an educational disability that is preventing them from accessing the general education curriculum. Once you put that in writing and make sure you get confirmation the school has it, that 90-day timeline for the IEP process starts immediately. Conversely, Section 504 does not have a legally mandated timeline. They're not legally required to review it every year. They are not, the only thing that their timeline is that they must discuss reevaluation every 3 years. Stephanie put up an amazing list during her presentation of a sample of accommodations, because that addressed one of the questions. One person asked if your child has other health impairment, are they automatically eligible for a 50 IEP? And that was by DV Mural. So I'm apologizing if I'm pronouncing it right. Other health impairment is actually an educational disability category. So if the school has given that to your child, then they probably already have an IEP or a Section 504 plan. ADHD is the most common one that falls under other health impaired. So if you have a diagnosis of ADHD and you are requesting your child to determine if your child has an IEP, then I would start the IEP process. And parents, it's just like a big tip and trick. It's really important before you go to any of these meetings, whether it's a Section 504 meeting through an EMT or your first IEP meeting, come prepared with a bulleted list of what you want to say, because it's very hard to talk about everything when you're put on the spot. So what are your child's strengths? And making sure you talk about their strengths, because we always focus on the negative, right? Like we're talking about what your child can't do and what's hard for them, but we don't want to forget who your child is and their strengths. Show a picture of your child to the team if some of them don't know who your child is. You want to make it real and you want it to be collaborative. My mantra is you get nowhere in life by being mean to anybody, especially those who are going to be taking care of your children.
Good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that idea of like, you know, having those points.
I know, I should like coin that or
Yeah.
trademark it or something.
Yeah, it's good to also, you could also provide your meeting talking points in advance of the meeting. So then they have an idea that the school can be prepared to address your issues as well.
So, Stephanie, piggybacking on that. So what I usually tell parents to do is that they absolutely can prepare them in advance, but I always tell them, the team at the table, that their parents are going to send a final one to include in the parental input of the IEP, because things might change and new things, you might hear new things at that meeting. So Stephanie is correct. Sending it in advance is really important, but then you could also tell them a final one is coming.
For sure.
How do I receive an advocate? So our group, we get hired by families, but we also have sliding scale and we do pro bono work as well, because we don't turn anybody away for funding because of finances. We want our services to be available to all children. Stephanie could speak to how her group works on that.
Yeah, I'm a solo practitioner here, but I work on my own in my practice, but I am connected with a lot of colleagues if it's not the right fit for me. But yeah, so if you want to reach out to an advocate, I mean, we're both available, but there's so many other ones. I don't know if you're in the DC area, or I mean, if you're in a more remote area, could it be a little bit more challenging? But these days, a lot of meetings are being held virtually, so you could actually work with someone online and attend your meetings online. So that's always an option. So, and there's different groups, hopefully in your area. Like I know Jennifer and I were both part of, and the Weinbergers, we're also part of this group called Wiser DC, like WISER.org, and you can find other advocates and other professionals that can help you with these meetings.
All right.
Yeah, sorry,
Stephanie and Jennifer. Thank you guys so much for sharing your wisdom, your expertise. Obviously, this is a popular topic and so important. And kids who had learning differences prior to the pandemic, and families were unsure: are these actual learning differences or learning disabilities? The abrupt transitions to virtual learning and then back to school, and then classrooms being shut down, and then going home and then back to school has definitely brought out and exacerbated some things that might have been kind of brewing. And so this is obviously a very timely topic, super duper important. Thank you both so much for your expertise. I know there's lots of questions, and I think we got to a lot of them, but we may not have gotten to quite all of them. We'll consider this as we think about future topics. Just wanted to share again how important these executive function skills are for kids with and without learning differences. These skills represent the foundations for learning, organization, time management, study skills, social skills. And I know that these accommodations are available, and kids who qualify are legally entitled, at least in the public school systems, and often in the private school systems. They're honored in order to demonstrate, have an equal opportunity to demonstrate what they know and their capacity to learn and demonstrate that knowledge. But we are still functioning, even with accommodations, in the same world. And so these executive function skills are so incredibly important. And represent essential compensatory skills for kids who are struggling with learning differences to still function and thrive in this environment. We put up a slide with our contact information for those of you in Texas, SAOTG. Our office here is 713-665-GAME or 4263 and SAOTG.com. Some wonderful resources there, blogs, etc. And on Instagram, SAOTG is the handle, and Staying Ahead of the Game on Facebook. And for Illuminos, our office here, 571-333-5133, and Illuminos_coaching on Instagram. And if you search Illuminos coaching on Facebook, both, I encourage you to follow both. We have different and sometimes the same, but also sometimes different timely tips throughout the year to share. We also have our newsletters where you can subscribe to those through our website with additional completely free timely tips. And if you want to stay apprised about and informed on our upcoming webinars about topics like this, bringing in experts like Jennifer and Stephanie on a variety of topics at a time that I know families need it most. Please, please find us, follow us so that you can stay up to date on those. And I just can't thank you enough, Jennifer and Stephanie, for your time and sharing your expertise. This was absolutely a very well-attended webinar. Wendy?
No, thank you everybody for joining, and we will talk about having a follow-up Q&A session. Obviously, there's a lot of questions and a lot of personal situations, so please feel free to reach out to Jennifer and Stephanie as well. They did have their information up. We will share it when we send an email to all of you later this week, so you'll be able to contact them directly. And of course, you guys can contact us at any time for help with your children. If you want, it doesn't matter who you contact. Illuminos or Staying Ahead of the Game, Evan and I will figure out where you're supposed to be and get you the support that you need. But again, don't feel shy about reaching out to Stephanie or Jennifer to ask them questions. So we thank you so much. We hope you have a great day. And thank you, Jennifer and Stephanie. It's always good to see you guys.
Thank you so much for having us. It was a pleasure.
I hope this was informative for everyone. So everyone have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.